The rain drummed against the tin roof of Carter's garage like 1,000 restless fingers, each drop echoing through the cavernous space where Eli worked alone. The afternoon had turned gray and cold, typical for October in Millfield, Maine, where the ocean's moods dictated the weather, and the lobstermen knew better than to challenge angry skies. Eli Carter bent over the engine of Mrs. Henderson's old Buick, his calloused hands moving with the practiced precision of 30 years under hoods. At 52, his dark hair was streaked with silver, and lines mapped the corners of his eyes, evidence of decades squinting in engine bays and facing coastal winds. His flannel shirt, faded to the color of old denim, bore the permanent stains that marked him as a man who fixed things for a living. Roscoe, his 10-year-old golden retriever, lay stretched across a patch of afternoon light near the open bay door. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Occasionally lifting his graying muzzle when a particularly strong gust rattled the building, the dog's presence was as constant as the tide, a warm, breathing reminder that Eli wasn't entirely alone, even when he preferred to be. The familiar rhythm of wrench against bolt, the soft wheeze of the air compressor, the distant cry of gulls, these sounds had become the soundtrack of Eli's measured existence. He worked methodically, losing himself in the puzzle of pistons and belts, where problems had solutions and every broken thing could be made whole again. That piece shattered when a scooter coughed, sputtered, and died just outside his garage. "Come on, you piece of—" The voice was young, female, and thoroughly exasperated. Eli straightened, wiping his hands on a rag as he watched a figure in a rain-soaked jacket wrestle with a bright blue Vespa that had clearly given up the fight. The rider pulled off her helmet, revealing a cascade of dark hair and a face flushed with frustration. She was young, maybe 19 or 20, with the kind of restless energy that reminded Eli of a trapped bird. Her jeans were dark with rain, her sneakers squelching as she dismounted and gave the scooter a disgusted look. "Excuse me," she called, jogging toward the garage entrance. "Are you open? My scooter just died, and I'm supposed to be at work in 20 minutes. Eli hesitated. He'd grown comfortable with his routine of familiar faces and predictable repairs. Strangers meant conversation beyond carburetors and timing belts, questions he might not want to answer. But the rain was picking up, and the girl looked thoroughly miserable. "Come in out of the wet," he said, gesturing toward the garage. "I'll take a look." She hurried inside, shaking droplets from her hair. Up close, Eli could see she had intelligent brown eyes that darted around the garage, taking in the organized chaos of tools and parts with obvious curiosity. "I'm Lila," she said, extending a damp hand. "Lila Bennett. Thanks for this. I know you probably close soon." Eli Carter. His handshake was brief but firm. "And I don't close at any particular time. Let's see what's wrong with your ride." As they walked back toward the scooter, Roscoe padded over, his tail wagging with the enthusiasm he reserved for new people. Lila immediately knelt to scratch behind his ears, earning an adoring look from the golden retriever. "What's his name?" she asked, her irritation melting into a genuine smile. "Roscoe. He's the real owner of this place. I just pay the bills." Lila laughed, a bright sound that seemed to warm the cool air. "He's beautiful. How old?" 10 this past spring. Found him as a pup, all ribs and fleas, wandering the harbor. "A rescue like my scooter," she said, giving Roscoe one final pat before standing, though he's clearly in better shape. Eli wheeled the Vespa into the garage, immediately noting the smell of flooded engine and the telltale signs of water in the fuel line. Common problem with older scooters, especially in Maine's unpredictable weather. "When's the last time you had her serviced?" he asked, already reaching for his diagnostic tools. "Honestly, I bought her from a guy in Portland 3 months ago. He said she just needed love and regular gas." Lila watched him work with obvious fascination. "I'm not exactly mechanically inclined." "Most people aren't. That's job security for me." She smiled at that, settling onto an upturned crate near his workbench. "So you've been doing this long?" "Long enough." Eli's response was automatic, polite but discouraging further questions. He'd perfected the art of friendly distance over the years. But Lila seemed immune to subtle brush-offs. "This town seems like the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. Born and raised?" "Something like that." He focused on the carburetor, hoping she'd take the hint. "I just moved here in August. For college, well, community college, and to work at Maggie's Cafe downtown. You probably know it. Eli nodded. He knew Maggie's, though he rarely ate anywhere but home. Good coffee. The best on the coast, according to Maggie. Though, between you and me, I think she might be slightly biased. Lila's laugh came easily, filling the spaces between his careful words. As Eli worked, he found himself stealing glances at her. There was something about her mannerisms, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when thinking, the slight tilt of her head when listening, that struck him as familiar. But then, half the girls in Maine had that same Celtic coloring and stubborn chin. There, he said, straightening after 20 minutes of careful cleaning and adjustment, water in the fuel system. Common problem after heavy rain if the tank seal's compromised. How much do I owe you? 25 should cover it. Lila pulled out her wallet, counting bills carefully. Eli noticed the way she hesitated, clearly calculating whether she had enough left for gas and whatever else college kids spent money on. Make it 20, he said gruffly, turning back to his workbench. You sure? I mean, you spent a lot of time on it. I'm sure. She handed him the money, then lingered by the scooter, pulling on her helmet slowly. The rain had softened to a gentle patter, and golden afternoon light was beginning to break through the clouds. Thank you, she said. Really? You saved my job, probably. Eli nodded, already turning back to Mrs. Henderson's Buick. But as the scooter puttered to life and pulled away, he found himself watching through the window until it disappeared around the bend toward town. Roscoe ambled over and sat beside him, tail thumping against the concrete floor. What? Eli asked, looking down at the dog's knowing expression. She needed help with her scooter, that's all. Roscoe's tail continued its steady rhythm, and Eli could swear the old dog was smiling. The coffee was still warm when Lila pushed through the garage's side door 3 days later, a brown paper bag tucked under her arm and that same bright smile lighting her face. Eli looked up from the transmission he was rebuilding, surprise flickering across his weathered features before settling back into his usual careful neutrality. Hope I'm not interrupting, she said, setting the bag on his workbench. I brought coffee and some of Maggie's blueberry muffins. Call it a proper thank you for the other day. Eli wiped his hands on his coveralls, eyeing the bag with the wariness of a man unaccustomed to unexpected kindness. That wasn't necessary. Maybe not necessary, but definitely deserved. She unpacked 2 steaming cups and a pair of muffins wrapped in wax paper. Besides, I was curious about this place. It's like stepping back in time, in a good way. Roscoe appeared as if summoned by the smell of baked goods, his tail creating a percussion against the concrete as he begged with liquid brown eyes. Lila immediately broke off a small piece of muffin, offering it on her palm. He's got you trained already, Eli observed, accepting the coffee she held out to him. Dogs are excellent judges of character. If Roscoe likes me, I must be doing something right. She scratched the retriever's ears as he demolished the muffin piece with delicate precision. How long have you had this place? About 15 years. Bought it from old Pete Santilli when he retired to Florida. Eli sipped his coffee. Black, strong, exactly how he liked it. You remembered. What? No cream, no sugar. Most people assume everyone wants it sweetened. Lila shrugged, settling onto the same crate she'd claimed during her first visit. I'm observant. Occupational hazard of being a waitress. You learn to read people quickly. Is that what you want to do? Wait tables? God, no. I'm studying art therapy, actually. Want to work with kids someday, maybe in hospitals or schools. She pulled a small sketchbook from her jacket pocket, flipping it open to reveal detailed pencil drawings. This is more my speed. Eli found himself drawn closer, studying the images over the rim of his coffee cup. They were good, really good. Detailed portraits of cafe customers, seascapes of the harbor, studies of hands and faces that captured something essential about her subjects. You're talented, he said, meaning it. Thanks. My mom, well, Mara, she raised me, always said I saw things differently than other people. Took me forever to figure out that was supposed to be a good thing. Something in her tone made Eli look up from the sketchbook. There was a story there, hidden behind her casual words. But he recognized the deflection for what it was. He'd perfected the same technique himself. "This town's good for artists," he said instead. "All that history, all those faces weathered by salt air. You sound like you know something about it." "I know this place. Been watching it change for decades." He settled back against his workbench, surprised to find himself talking. Used to be more fishing boats than pleasure craft in the harbor, more working folks than summer people. Different kind of character. "Do you miss it, the way it was?" Eli considered the question seriously. "Some things. But change isn't always bad. Just different." "That's very philosophical for a mechanic," Lila teased. "We're a deep lot, us grease monkeys." The sound of boots on gravel announced another visitor before Sam O'Reilly's lanky frame filled the doorway. Eli's oldest friend surveyed the scene. The coffee cups, the sketches, Lila's easy posture on the crate, with the sharp eyes of a man who'd known Eli Carter since they were boys, stealing apples from Mrs. Finnegan's orchard. "Well, well," Sam said, his weathered face creasing into a grin. "Looks like I'm interrupting something." "Sam, this is Lila Bennett." "Lila, Sam O'Reilly. He captains the Mary Catherine out of the harbor." "Nice to meet you," Lila said, standing to shake Sam's hand. "Likewise. Bennett, you said? Don't know any Bennetts in Millfield. I just moved here from Calais. My mom, Mara Bennett. She's originally from around here, but moved away before I was born." Sam's eyebrows rose slightly, and Eli caught the questioning look his friend shot him. Sam had a memory like a steel trap for local families and their histories. If he didn't recognize the name, it meant something. "What brings you back to the area?" Sam asked. "School, mostly. And I guess I wanted to see where my roots were, you know? Mara doesn't talk much about the old days." "A lot of folks have complicated relationships with their past," Sam said carefully. "Sometimes the stories get lost along the way." Eli felt an odd tension settling over the conversation, though he couldn't pinpoint why. Sam was watching Lila with unusual intensity, and there was something in her expression, a flicker of uncertainty when she mentioned her mother. "I should get going," Lila said, closing her sketchbook and tucking it away. "Thanks for the coffee break, Eli, and nice meeting you, Sam." She gathered the empty cups and paper, pausing at the door. "Same time next week. I make excellent coffee, even if I do say so myself." Eli found himself nodding before he'd consciously decided to answer. "Sure, if you want." "I want," she said simply, then disappeared into the afternoon with a wave. Sam waited until the sound of her scooter faded before turning to Eli with a look that suggested serious conversation ahead. "Interesting girl," he said neutrally. "She's just a kid who needed her scooter fixed." "Uh-huh. Kid who brings you coffee and hangs around sketching. When's the last time you had a visitor who wasn't picking up a repair?" Eli turned back to his transmission, uncomfortable with the direction of Sam's questions. "She's being polite, grateful for the help." "Maybe." Sam leaned against the workbench, his tone growing more thoughtful. "You notice anything particular about her? The way she moves, maybe? That little laugh of hers?" "What are you getting at, Sam?" "Nothing specific, just something familiar." "Can't quite put my finger on it." Eli's hand stilled on the wrench he'd been tightening. He had noticed something familiar about Lila, the way she tilted her head, the quick intelligence in her eyes, even the stubborn set of her jaw when she'd insisted on paying for the repair. But familiarity was a dangerous thing for a man who'd spent 20 years learning to live with ghosts. "Lot of people look like other people," he said finally. "True enough," Sam straightened, sensing he'd pushed as far as friendship allowed. "Just think it's nice you having some company for a change. Been too long since you let yourself enjoy talking to folks." After Sam left, Eli tried to focus on his work, but his mind kept drifting to coffee that tasted like thoughtfulness and sketches that captured the soul of things. When Roscoe wandered over and settled at his feet with a contented sigh, Eli could have sworn the old dog was smiling again. "Don't get any ideas," he muttered, but his hand found the golden fur anyway, scratching behind familiar ears as the afternoon light slanted through his garage windows. The house felt smaller in the evening, shadows gathering in corners that daylight usually kept at bay. Eli moved through the familiar rooms of the modest Cape Cod he'd bought 25 years ago, when the future had seemed bright with possibilities, and the mortgage had stretched his young mechanic's salary thin. Back then, the place had felt like a palace. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, and a kitchen where sunlight streamed through white curtains. Sarah had hung their first week as homeowners. Now, it felt like a mausoleum. Roscoe patted behind him as Eli made his evening rounds. checking locks, turning off lights, the ritual of a man who lived alone and had grown comfortable with solitude's rhythms. But tonight, something felt different. Restless. The coffee cups from Lila's visit still sat in his sink, and her laughter seemed to echo in the garage's emptiness when he'd finally closed up shop. In the living room, he paused before the mantelpiece where photographs marked the chapters of his truncated story. Sarah at 18, hair wild from ocean wind, laughing at something just outside the camera's frame. Their wedding day, her in white lace that had belonged to her grandmother, him looking impossibly young in a borrowed suit. Sarah at 7 months pregnant, hands cradling her belly, eyes bright with anticipation. The last photograph was different, formal, clinical. Sarah holding a tiny bundle, both of them exhausted but radiant in that hospital room. Baby Emma, barely a week old, fingers no bigger than matchsticks, sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms. It was the only picture Eli had of his daughter. He touched the frame's edge with one finger, the way he had countless times before, and felt the familiar ache settle in his chest. 20 years, and it still felt like yesterday. 20 years, and it still felt like a lifetime. The accident had taken Sarah on a Tuesday. Black ice on Route 1, her little Honda no match for the patch of frozen death that sent her into the path of an 18-wheeler. She'd been coming back from her mother's house in Eastport, where she'd taken the baby for what was supposed to be a short visit. One moment Eli had been expecting them home for dinner. The next, he was racing to Eastern Maine Medical Center, praying to a God he'd never been sure believed in him. Sarah died before he reached the hospital. Emma survived, tiny and perfect and utterly alone except for a father who barely knew how to hold her without shaking. For 6 weeks Eli had tried. God, how he'd tried. Bottles and diapers and sleepless nights spent walking the floors with a crying infant who seemed to know her world had crumbled. His mother-in-law helped when she could, but she was grieving too, lost in her own ocean of loss. The social worker who visited twice a week was kind but overwhelmed, managing too many cases of tragedy and broken families. Then came the phone call that changed everything. A mix-up at the hospital, paperwork filed incorrectly. Emma's birth certificate had somehow been flagged with the wrong information, and in the chaos following Sarah's death, she'd been temporarily placed in the state system. By the time Eli discovered the error, his daughter had been moved to a private adoption agency. Emergency placement, they called it. A loving family was already caring for her. The legal battle that followed consumed 2 years of Eli's life and everything he'd saved. Lawyer after lawyer, each promising they could fix the system's mistake, each ultimately defeated by bureaucracy and time. The adoption had been finalized. The new family had bonded with the child they knew as their daughter. Emma, who was no longer Emma but someone else entirely, was thriving in her new home. The final blow came from an unexpected source, Sarah's mother, who begged him to stop fighting. Let her be happy. She'd whispered through tears during their last conversation. Sarah would want her to be happy. So Eli had stopped. He'd signed the papers that severed his legal claim to his daughter and tried to convince himself it was the right thing to do. The family had moved away. He'd heard California, though he'd never tried to confirm it. Emma became a ghost, a might have been, a 20-year-old hole in his heart. Now, standing in his too-quiet house with Roscoe warm against his leg, Eli found himself thinking about Lila Bennett and the way she'd moved through his garage like she belonged there. About her laugh and the intelligence in her dark eyes and the stubborn tilt of her chin when she'd insisted on paying for her repair. About the fact that she was exactly the age his daughter would be now. He shook his head, annoyed with himself for the direction of his thoughts. Half the young women in Maine probably looked vaguely familiar to him. Same Celtic features, same coastal independence. It didn't mean anything. It couldn't mean anything. In the kitchen, he found the manila envelope he'd hidden in the back of his utility drawer years ago, the one containing all the official documents from Emma's case. Social worker reports, court filings, the final adoption decree that had ended his legal claim to fatherhood. He'd kept them, though he couldn't say why. Maybe as evidence that she'd existed. Maybe as punishment for failing to protect her. The papers were yellowed now, edges soft with age. He spread them on his kitchen table under the harsh fluorescent light, reading details he'd memorized decades ago. Birth date, October 12th. Place of birth, Eastern Maine Medical Center. Mother, Sarah Elizabeth Carter, deceased. Father, Eli James Carter. Adopting family, Bennett. Eli's breath caught in his throat. In 20 years of carrying this grief, he'd somehow managed to forget that detail. Or maybe he'd buried it so deep that remembering felt impossible. But there it was, typed neatly on official letterhead, placement with David and Mara Bennett, approved for emergency adoption pending finalization. Bennett. Like Lila Bennett, who'd moved to Millfield from Calais, and whose mother never talked about the old days. His hands shook as he calculated dates, ages, possibilities. The timeline fit perfectly. Too perfectly. And suddenly, Sam's words from this afternoon took on new meaning. "You notice anything particular about her? Something familiar?" Eli stared at the papers until the words blurred, his mind racing between hope and terror. What were the chances? In a state with over 1 million people, what were the chances that his daughter would walk into his garage on a rainy afternoon, needing help with her scooter? But as he sat in his kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of loss and legal failure, one thing became crystal clear. He was either losing his mind, or fate had just handed him the most impossible gift imaginable. And he had absolutely no idea what to do with it. Roscoe patted over and rested his chin on Eli's knee, brown eyes full of the patient sympathy that had gotten them both through the worst of the lonely years. Eli scratched behind the dog's ears and tried to quiet the storm of possibility building in his chest. Tomorrow, Lila Bennett would probably stop by his garage again with coffee and conversation. And tomorrow, Eli would have to decide whether to live with questions that might destroy him, or find the courage to discover if some miracles were real after all. 3 weeks passed like pages, turning in a well-loved book, each day bringing Lila's visits into sharper focus, until they became the rhythm around which Eli's world quietly reorganized itself. She arrived most afternoons around 3:30, when the lunch rush at Maggie's ended and her evening classes at the community college were still hours away. Sometimes she brought coffee, sometimes just her sketchbook, and the kind of easy conversation that had become as essential to Eli's day as his morning coffee. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Today she carried a paper bag that smelled of cinnamon and a leather satchel worn soft with use. Roscoe greeted her with his usual enthusiasm, tail creating small tornadoes of sawdust and metal shavings as she knelt to scratch behind his ears. "I brought apple turnovers," she announced, settling onto what had become her unofficial crate. Maggie was experimenting with her grandmother's recipe, and I volunteered to be a taste tester. "Dangerous job," Eli said, wiping his hands before accepting the pastry she offered. The first bite was perfect. Tart apples balanced with brown sugar and cinnamon, wrapped in pastry that flaked apart like autumn leaves. "She's thinking of adding them to the regular menu. I told her she'd be crazy not to." Lila pulled her sketchbook from the satchel, flipping to a fresh page. "Mind if I draw while you work? There's something about the way your hands move when you're focused, like you're reading the engine's mind." Eli felt heat creep up his neck at the compliment. "Don't know about reading minds. Mostly just listening to what's broken." "Same thing, isn't it?" She positioned her pencil thoughtfully. "Everything has a voice if you know how to hear it." As Eli returned to the carburetor rebuild that had been consuming his afternoon, he found himself hyper-aware of Lila's presence. The soft scratch of pencil on paper, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when concentrating, the small sound of satisfaction she made when a line came out exactly right. All of it felt both new and ancient, like remembering a song he'd forgotten he knew. "You always wanted to be a mechanic?" she asked, not looking up from her sketch. "Started helping my dad when I was 10. He had a small shop over on Harbor Street. Nothing fancy, just him and a couple of bays. Figured I'd take it over someday." Eli paused, surprised by how easily the words came. Life had other plans. "What happened?" "Dad had a heart attack when I was 17. Mom sold the business to pay medical bills." He shrugged, the gesture carrying decades of acceptance. "Worked for other people until I could afford this place." "That must have been hard, losing the family business." "Hard things happen. You adjust." Lila's pencil stilled. "Is that your philosophy? Just adjust and keep going?" Something in her tone made Eli look up. She was watching him with those dark eyes that seemed to see more than they should, and for a moment he felt exposed, as if she could read the careful architecture of his emotional distance. "What's the alternative?" he asked. "I don't know. Fight back? Demand better? Refuse to accept that hard things just happen?" Her voice carried an edge he hadn't heard before. "Sometimes adjusting feels like giving up." Eli set down his wrench, studying her face. "Sounds like you've got some experience with hard things yourself." "Some." She returned to her sketching, but the easy comfort between them had shifted into something more complex. "My parents, Mara and David, they're good people, love me, support me, all that. But sometimes I feel like I'm living someone else's life, like I'm wearing clothes that almost fit but not quite." "How so?" "Little things. I'm left-handed, they're both righties. I love spicy food, they think black pepper is exotic. I see art everywhere, they see practical applications." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "They joke that I'm their little changeling." Eli's chest tightened. "Changeling?" The fairy tale thing. Fairies steal human babies and leave one of their own in the crib. The changeling looks almost like the real child, but never quite fits." Lila's laugh was brittle. "Mara says it whenever I do something particularly un-Bennett-like, which is often." The carburetor parts swam in Eli's vision as his pulse hammered against his temples. He'd spent 3 weeks watching Lila, cataloging the small mannerisms that reminded him of Sarah, the stubborn intelligence that echoed his own. But this felt like the universe speaking directly to him. "Ever ask them about it? Your adoption?" The question slipped out before he could stop it, hanging in the air between them like a held breath. Lila's pencil froze mid-stroke. "How did you?" She looked up sharply, something vulnerable flickering across her features. "I never said I was adopted." Eli's mind raced, searching for safe ground. "Small town, people talk, and you mentioned your mother not discussing the old days." "Right." Lila closed her sketchbook slowly. "I've asked, but Mara gets uncomfortable. Says she'll tell me when I'm ready to hear it, whatever that means. David just changes the subject entirely. Maybe they're protecting you from something painful. Maybe, or maybe they're protecting themselves." She stood, gathering her things with movements that had lost their earlier ease. "I should go. Evening class starts soon." Eli watched her prepare to leave, everything in him wanting to call her back to ask the questions that burned in his throat. Instead he said, "Same time tomorrow?" "If you want the company." "I do." After she left, Eli sat motionless in his garage, surrounded by the familiar smells of oil and metal, trying to process what felt like a conversation with a ghost. Roscoe wandered over and settled beside him, the dog's warm weight a comfort against his leg. "She knows," he said to Roscoe. "Part of her knows something's not right." The dog's tail thumped once against the concrete, a gesture that might have been agreement or simple sympathy. Eli pulled out his phone, staring at Sam's number in his contacts. His oldest friend deserved to know what he was thinking, what he suspected. But saying it out loud would make it real, and Eli wasn't sure he was ready for real. Not yet. Instead, he returned to his work, letting the familiar rhythm of repair wash over him. But for the first time in years, the mechanical puzzles couldn't quiet the storm in his head. Somewhere in town, Lila Bennett was sitting in a classroom, learning about art therapy and healing broken things. And Eli Carter was sitting in his garage, wondering if some breaks were too deep to ever truly mend. Or if maybe, just maybe, they could be transformed into something even stronger. The black BMW looked as out of place in Carter's garage as a tuxedo at a lobster bake. Eli watched through the window as Dean Holloway emerged from the driver's seat, adjusting his tie and shooting his cuffs like a man preparing for battle. Everything about Holloway screamed money and ambition, from his perfectly styled hair to his Italian leather shoes that had never seen an honest day's work. Eli had known this visit was coming. Word traveled fast in Millfield, and the rumors about Holloway's development plans had been circulating for weeks. Harborview Commons, they were calling it a luxury shopping and dining complex that would transform the weathered charm of downtown into something slick and profitable. "Mr. Carter?" Holloway's smile was practiced, revealing teeth white enough to blind a pilot. "Dean Holloway, Holloway Development Group. I was hoping we could chat for a few minutes." "About what?" Eli didn't stop working on the transmission he was rebuilding, but his shoulders tensed. "Opportunity, Mr. Carter, the kind that comes along once in a lifetime." Holloway picked his way carefully through the garage, avoiding oil stains with the precision of a dancer. I'm sure you've heard about the Harbor View project. I've heard. Then you know we're looking to revitalize this entire section of town, bring in quality businesses, create jobs, increase property values. Holloway paused beside Eli's workbench, his gaze sweeping the cluttered space with obvious distaste. Your property is perfectly positioned for our vision. Eli finally looked up, meeting Holloway's pale blue eyes with a steady stare. My property isn't for sale. Everything's for sale, Mr. Carter. It's just a matter of finding the right price. Holloway pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket. I've had your lot appraised. I think you'll find my offer more than generous. Eli didn't touch the paper. I said it's not for sale. Perhaps you should look at the numbers before making such a hasty decision. Holloway's smile faltered slightly. This garage has been here for what, 15 years? The building's showing its age. Equipment's outdated. Wouldn't you rather retire comfortably than struggle along until... Until what? Eli's voice carried a warning that made Roscoe lift his head from his afternoon nap. Until market forces make the decision for you. Holloway's mask of civility slipped, revealing something harder underneath. Progress waits for no one, Mr. Carter. This town is changing whether you like it or not. You can be part of that change, profit from it, or you can be swept aside by it. The sound of a scooter approaching broke the tension. Through the window, Eli watched Lila park her Vespa and remove her helmet, shaking out her dark hair. She looked fresh from class, books tucked under her arm, that easy smile playing at the corners of her mouth until she noticed the BMW and the stranger in her usual spot. Eli, she called, hesitating at the garage entrance. Everything okay? Fine, Eli said, but his eyes stayed locked on Holloway. Just finishing up some business. Holloway turned to appraise Lila with the same calculating look he'd given the garage. And you are? A friend, Lila said coolly, something in Holloway's manner clearly rubbing her wrong. How nice. Always good to see young people taking an interest in. Holloway gestured vaguely at the garage. Local history. Is that what this is? History? Lila moved to stand beside Eli's workbench, her presence both comforting and protective. Soon to be, yes. Mr. Carter and I were just discussing the future of this property. Were you now? Lila's tone carried the kind of polite ice that could freeze coffee mid-pour. And what does the future look like? Progress, development, jobs. Holloway's political smile returned. The kind of growth that benefits everyone. Everyone except the people who get displaced. Holloway's eyes sharpened with interest. You seem passionate about this issue, miss? Bennett, Lila Bennett. She crossed her arms, unmistakably claiming her territory. And yes, I'm passionate about it. This place has character, history. It's authentic. Authentic doesn't pay the bills, Miss Bennett. Authentic doesn't create economic opportunity. Neither does bulldozing everything that makes a place special. Eli watched the exchange with a mixture of pride and concern. Lila's defense of his garage warmed something deep in his chest, but he could see Holloway filing away details, calculating angles. Well, Holloway said, tucking the offer back into his jacket, this has been illuminating. Mr. Carter, my offer stands, but not indefinitely. Market conditions change rapidly in today's economy. He turned to leave, then paused. Miss Bennett, did you say Bennett? Any relation to David Bennett from up in Calais? Lila's face went carefully blank. You know my father? Of him. Small business owner, wasn't he? Sometimes these family enterprises need outside capital to survive challenging times. Holloway's smile turned predatory. I help people navigate those challenges. Perhaps we'll speak again. After the BMW disappeared down Harbor Street, Lila turned to Eli with concern written across her features. What was that about? Is he really trying to buy your garage? Trying being the operative word. Eli wiped his hands on a rag, buying time to process the conversation. You didn't have to defend me. Yes, I did. This place is important. You're important. She gestured around the garage with fierce protectiveness. Men like that, they see everything as potential profit. They don't understand that some things are worth more than money. And what's this place worth? Community, continuity, the knowledge that when something breaks, there's someone who cares enough to fix it right. Lila's cheeks flushed with passion. You've probably fixed half the cars in this town. How many people have you helped over the years? How many problems have you solved? Eli found himself staring at her, struck by the intensity of her conviction. In her fierce defense of his small garage, he heard echoes of Sarah's voice, the same unwavering loyalty that had drawn him to his wife all those years ago. "He knew your father," he said quietly. Lila's expression shifted, the fire dimming into something more guarded. "A lot of people knew David. He ran a hardware store for 30 years before he retired. You worried about that? Holloway knowing your family?" "Should I be?" Eli studied her face, noting the tension around her eyes. Men like Holloway don't mention people casually. He was fishing for something. "Well, he won't catch anything. Our family doesn't have secrets worth fishing for." But even as she said it, Lila's voice carried a note of uncertainty that made Eli's chest tighten. Later, after she'd left for her evening job at the cafe, Eli stood in his garage trying to make sense of the day's events. Holloway's visit had been expected, but his interest in Lila felt like a complication Eli couldn't afford. Sam's warning echoed in his memory. Dean's the type to dig into people's business when crossed. If Holloway started digging into Lila's background, what might he find? And more importantly, what might he do with whatever he discovered? Eli pulled out his phone and scrolled to Sam's number. This time, he didn't hesitate. "Sam? It's Eli. We need to talk." The argument had started over something small. Lila wanting to pay for her own car insurance instead of letting Mara handle it. But like all fights between mothers and daughters, it had quickly spiraled into deeper territory. By the time Layla stormed out of the small apartment she shared with her adoptive mother, the words hanging between them had carved fresh wounds and old scars. "You never let me grow up," Lila had shouted, keys already in her hand. "I'm 19, Mara. I can handle my own responsibilities." "You're still my daughter," Mara had replied, her voice tight with the kind of fear that masqueraded as control. "And I won't apologize for wanting to protect you." "Protect me from what? From being independent? From making my own mistakes? From making unnecessary ones." The conversation had devolved from there, touching on every sensitive point they'd spent months avoiding. College expenses, Lila's part-time jobs, the way Mara still treated her like a child who needed constant supervision. And underneath it all, the question that neither of them wanted to address directly: why did Mara seem so afraid of letting Lila make her own choices about anything important? Now 3 hours later, Lila found herself riding through the gathering dusk toward the one place that had started to feel like sanctuary. The garage lights were still on, casting warm yellow rectangles across the gravel drive, and she could see Eli's silhouette bent over an engine block, his movements precise and unhurried. She parked her scooter and sat for a moment, trying to organize her thoughts. The smart thing would be to go home, apologize to Mara, and pretend the fight had never happened. That's what she'd always done before: smoothed over the rough edges, kept the peace, maintained the careful balance that made their small family work. But tonight, she didn't want to be smart. Tonight, she wanted to be honest. Eli looked up as she entered the garage, taking in her expression with the quick assessment of a man who'd learned to read moods the way he read engine troubles. "Rough evening?" he asked, not stopping his work but shifting his attention to include her. "You could say that." Lila settled onto her usual crate, pulling her knees up to her chest. "Fight with Mara. The kind where you say things you can't take back." "Want to talk about it? Do you ever feel like you're living in someone else's story?" The question came out before she could stop it, raw and immediate. Like everyone around you has this idea of who you're supposed to be, and you just go along with it because it's easier than figuring out who you really are? Eli's hand stilled on the wrench he'd been turning. When he looked at her, his dark eyes held a depth of understanding that made her chest tight. "Yeah," he said quietly, "I know that feeling." "How do you deal with it?" "Mostly by avoiding situations where it comes up." His smile was rueful. "Not exactly healthy, but it works." "That's what I've been doing too, keeping my head down, not asking too many questions, not pushing too hard." Lila wrapped her arms around her knees. "But I'm tired of it. I'm tired of feeling like I'm walking on eggshells in my own life." Eli wiped his hands on a rag, then moved to lean against the workbench where he could see her face clearly. "What set off tonight's fight?" "Car insurance." "Stupid, right? But it's never really about the car insurance." Lila's laugh was bitter. "It's about the way Mara hovers. Like she's afraid I'm going to disappear if she's not watching every move I make. It's about the way she changes the subject every time I ask about my adoption. It's about feeling like I'm supposed to be grateful for being rescued, even though I never asked to be rescued from anything. Maybe she's not trying to rescue you. Maybe she's trying to hold on to you. What's the difference? Intent. Eli's voice carried the weight of hard experience. Sometimes people hold on tight because they're afraid of losing something precious. Doesn't make it right, but it makes it understandable. Lila studied his face, noting the way his jaw tightened when he talked about loss. You sound like you know something about that. I've lost people, know what it's like to wish you'd held on tighter when you had the chance. Who did you lose? The question hung in the air between them, and Lila immediately regretted asking. She'd learned to read Eli's silences, and this one was heavy with pain he wasn't ready to share. My wife, he said finally, long time ago, car accident. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. It's okay, Eli's voice was gentle. It was 20 years ago. Ancient history. But Lila could see it wasn't ancient to him. Could see the way grief had carved permanent lines around his eyes, the way he held himself just slightly apart from the world, as if protecting something fragile. Were you happy before? Yeah. The word came out soft, almost surprised. Yeah, we were happy, young and broke and planning a future that seemed endless. He looked at her with something that might have been recognition. She would have been about your age now, our daughter. Lila's breath caught. You had a daughter? For 6 weeks. Eli's voice was steady, but she could see the cost of the words. She died with her mother. Oh God, Eli, I'm so sorry. Don't be. It was a long time ago. He turned back to his engine, but his movements had lost their earlier precision. Point is, I understand why someone might hold on too tight. When you've lost everything that matters, you get protective of what's left. They worked in companionable silence for a while, Lila sketching while Eli continued his repairs. But her mind kept circling back to what he'd told her, to the image of a younger Eli holding a baby daughter who would never grow up. It explained so much about his careful distance, his reluctance to let people get too close. Eli, she said eventually, can I ask you something? Sure. Do you think it's possible to love someone and still hurt them? Not intentionally, but because you're so afraid of losing them that you end up pushing them away. Eli set down his tools and looked at her directly. I think fear makes people do things they wouldn't normally do. Makes them hold on when they should let go, or let go when they should hold on. He paused. I think most hurt between people who love each other comes from being afraid. What are you afraid of? The question surprised them both. Lila hadn't meant to ask it, and Eli clearly hadn't expected to be asked. But something in the quiet intimacy of the garage and the gentle light and familiar surroundings made honesty feel possible. These days, Eli's smile was sad. I'm afraid of caring too much about something I might lose again. Lila felt her heart break a little for this man who'd taught himself to live carefully, to love conditionally, to keep his world small enough that losing it wouldn't destroy him again. That's no way to live, she said softly. No, he agreed, but it's safe. Safe isn't the same as alive. Sometimes safe is enough. Is it? Really? Lila closed her sketchbook and stood, moving closer to where he worked. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're just as trapped as I am. Just as afraid to ask the hard questions. Eli's hands stilled on his wrench. What questions? The ones about why we found each other. Why I feel more at home in this garage than I've ever felt anywhere else. Why you look at me sometimes like you're seeing a ghost. She took a breath, gathering courage. Why it feels like we've been having the same conversation for 20 years, even though we've only known each other for a month. The silence that followed was charged with possibility and danger, with all the words they hadn't said and all the truths they were afraid to acknowledge. Eli looked at her with something raw and desperate in his eyes, and Lila felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. Then headlights swept across the garage windows, and they both stepped back as if released from a spell. A car door slammed, and Mara's voice called out from the darkness. Lila, honey, are you in there? I should go, Lila said quickly, gathering her things. We'll talk more later. Eli nodded, but something in his expression had shuttered closed again. Yeah, later. As Lila walked toward the door where her adoptive mother waited, she felt the weight of unfinished conversations and unanswered questions. Behind her, Eli Carter stood surrounded by the tools of his trade. wondering if some truths were too dangerous to speak aloud. And neither of them noticed the figure watching from across the street or the camera phone capturing their interaction through the garage windows. Sam O'Reilly arrived at the garage before dawn, the way he had for 30 years when something important needed discussing. He found Eli already there, nursing black coffee and staring at the manila envelope spread across his workbench like evidence at a crime scene. The adoption papers, yellowed with age, caught the early morning light streaming through the windows. "Jesus, Eli," Sam said, settling onto a crate with his own steaming mug. "You look like you haven't slept in a week. Feels like longer." Eli rubbed his face with both hands, the gesture of a man carrying too much weight. "I keep thinking I'm losing my mind, that I'm seeing connections that aren't there because I want them to be." Sam studied the papers without touching them, reading upside down with the skill of someone who'd spent decades deciphering shipping manifests and harbor logs. "Bennett, same as the girl." "Same as the girl?" Eli's voice was flat, emotionless. "Same age, same adoption timeline, same everything. What are the odds?" "In Maine? With all the scattered families and summer people moving around?" Sam shrugged. "Not as impossible as you'd think. But not likely either." "That's what I keep telling myself. It's just coincidence. Just a lonely old man seeing what he wants to see." "You're not old, and you're not imagining things." Sam's voice carried the authority of 4 decades of friendship. "I've been watching you two together. The way she moves, the way she laughs. That stubborn tilt of her chin when she's digging in her heels. She looks like Sarah, Eli. Acts like her, too." Eli's hands tightened around his coffee mug. "Sarah had dark hair. So did you, before it went gray. Genetics skip around, you know that." Sam leaned forward, his weathered face serious. "The question isn't whether it's possible. The question is what you're going to do about it." "Nothing." The word came out too quick, too sharp. "I'm going to do nothing." "Like hell you are." "What do you want me to do, Sam?" "Walk up to her and say, 'Hey, I think you might be my long-lost daughter'? Destroy her whole world on a hunch?" "It's more than a hunch, and you know it." Sam stood, pacing to the window where Harbor Street was beginning to show signs of morning life. "You've got documents, timelines, physical resemblance. You've got a girl who admits she doesn't fit with her adoptive family and a mother who won't talk about the past. I've got speculation and wishful thinking. You've got enough to ask some careful questions." Eli gathered the papers with shaking hands, sliding them back into their envelope. "And if I'm wrong, if I open this door and she's not, then and you can move on." Sam turned from the window, his expression gentler. "But if you're right, and you do nothing, you'll spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of a car pulling into the gravel drive. Through the window, they watched a silver sedan park near the entrance. Expensive but understated, the kind of vehicle driven by people who had money but didn't need to prove it. Dean Holloway emerged from the passenger seat, but it was the driver who caught Eli's attention. A woman in her 50s, well-dressed but tired-looking, with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. She moved with the careful precision of someone carrying invisible weight. "Expecting company?" Sam asked. "No," Eli's voice was tight, "but I've got a feeling I know what this is about." Holloway approached with his usual predatory smile, but the woman beside him seemed reluctant, hanging back slightly as if she'd rather be anywhere else. "Mr. Carter," Holloway called out, "I hope you don't mind the early hour. I've brought someone I think you should meet. This is Mara Bennett." The world tilted sideways. Eli felt Sam's hand on his shoulder, steadying him as Lila's adoptive mother stepped forward with obvious reluctance. "Mrs. Bennett," Eli managed, his voice hoarse. "Mr. Carter." Mara's smile was strained, her eyes darting between Eli and the garage as if looking for escape routes. "I apologize for the intrusion. Mr. Holloway suggested we should talk." "About what?" Holloway's grin widened. "About family history, Mr. Carter. Amazing what public records can reveal when you know where to look." Mara shot Holloway a look that could have frozen the harbor. "This wasn't what we agreed on." "Circumstances change, Mrs. Bennett. Your daughter's been spending considerable time here. Don't you think Mr. Carter has a right to know why?" "My daughter's friendships are her own business. Even when those friendships might be more complicated than they appear." Eli stepped forward, his patience finally snapping. What the hell are you talking about, Holloway? I'm talking about the fact that you've been playing surrogate father to a girl who might actually be your daughter. Holloway pulled a folder from his briefcase with theatrical flourish. Hospital records from October 2004, adoption papers filed in November. Birth certificate for one Emma Carter, subsequently renamed Lila Bennett. The silence that followed was deafening. Mara went pale, her hands trembling as she reached for the folder. Sam cursed under his breath. And Eli felt 20 years of carefully constructed emotional walls crumble into dust. "How did you?" Mara started. "Public records, Mrs. Bennett. Buried deep, but accessible if you know the right people and have the right motivation." Holloway's eyes glittered with satisfaction. Amazing what becomes relevant when property deals are involved. "You son of a bitch," Sam growled, stepping toward Holloway. "This is someone's life you're playing with." "I'm not playing with anything. I'm revealing the truth." Holloway turned back to Eli. "The question is, Mr. Carter, what are you going to do with this information? Because I imagine your daughter would be very interested to know that her biological father has been lying to her for weeks." Mara found her voice. "He hasn't been lying. He didn't know." "Didn't he?" Holloway's smile was razor-sharp. Man loses a daughter in a hospital mix-up, spends years fighting the system. Then, a girl with the right name, right age, right adoption timeline walks into his garage. "You're telling me he didn't suspect?" Eli looked at Mara, seeing his own anguish reflected in her face. "I hoped," he said quietly. "God help me, I hoped." And said nothing. Holloway pressed. "Let her come here day after day, getting attached, thinking she'd found a friend. When really, you were evaluating whether she was worth claiming." "That's not," Eli started. "Isn't it? Because from where I stand, it looks like you were conducting your own little investigation. Getting to know her, deciding if she met your standards as a daughter." "Stop it!" Mara's voice cracked like a whip. "Just stop. You don't know what you're talking about." "I know enough." Holloway closed his briefcase with a satisfied snap. "I know that secrets have a way of coming out, Mrs. Bennett. And I know that your daughter deserves better than being caught in the middle of someone else's property dispute." He turned to go, then paused. "Oh, and Mr. Carter? My offer still stands. But given recent developments, you might want to consider how messy things could get if this information became more widely known." After Holloway left, the three remaining adults stood in the garage like survivors of a natural disaster, trying to assess the damage. Mara was the first to speak. "I should have told her years ago," she whispered. "I always meant to, when she was older, when she was ready. But she seemed so happy, so settled. I couldn't bear to disrupt that." "She's not happy," Eli said gently. "She feels like she doesn't belong, asks questions you won't answer. Because the answers are complicated. Because telling her the truth means risking losing her." Mara's eyes filled with tears. "Do you have any idea what it's like to love a child who isn't biologically yours? To know that somewhere out there is someone with a better claim to her heart?" "I know what it's like to lose her completely," Eli replied. 20 years of not knowing if she was alive or dead, happy or hurting. 20 years of wondering if I fought hard enough, if I should have tried something different. I never meant for that to happen," the adoption agency said. "I'm not blaming you." Eli's voice was tired but sincere. "You gave her a good life, a family, love, things I couldn't have provided back then. But now?" Eli looked around his garage, at the life he'd built from the pieces of the old one. "Now, I don't know. Now everything's changed." "She's coming," Sam said quietly from the window. "Lila's here." They watched her park her scooter and remove her helmet, completely unaware that her world was about to explode. She looked happy, relaxed, carrying what appeared to be breakfast pastries and wearing the easy smile that had become such a familiar part of Eli's days. "What do we tell her?" Mara asked. Eli met her eyes, seeing 2 decades of shared love for the same girl reflected there. "The truth," he said. "It's time to tell her the truth." Lila knew something was wrong the moment she stepped into the garage. The air felt charged, like the moments before a lightning strike, and the 3 adults waiting for her looked like they were attending a funeral. Mara stood near the workbench with red-rimmed eyes. Sam hovered by the window with unusual tension in his shoulders. And Eli looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. "What's going on?" she asked, setting down the bag of Danish pastries she'd brought from the cafe. "Did someone die?" The silence that followed was so heavy it seemed to press against her chest. Mara and Eli exchanged a look loaded with 20 years of complicated history, and Lila felt the first flutter of real fear. "Sit down, honey," Mara said finally, her voice carefully controlled. "I don't want to sit down. I want to know what's happening." Lila's gaze moved between the three faces, searching for answers and expressions that gave nothing away. "Why are you here, Mara? Why does everyone look like the world's ending?" "Because in a way, it is," Eli said quietly. "The world you've known, anyway." Lila's heart started hammering against her ribs. "You're scaring me." "There's something we need to tell you," Mara began, then stopped, the words seeming to catch in her throat. "Something about your adoption, about who you really are." "I know who I am. I'm Layla Bennett, your daughter." "You're my daughter in every way that matters," Mara said quickly, "but biologically." "No." Lila stepped backward, bumping against a tool cart. "No, I don't want to hear this. Not like this. Not with everyone staring at me like I'm a bomb about to explode." "Lila," Eli said, his voice gentler than she'd ever heard it, "I know this is hard." "You know," she whirled to face him, something cold and terrible blooming in her chest. "What do you know? What does any of this have to do with you?" Another loaded silence. Sam cleared his throat and moved toward the door. "I'm going to give you folks some privacy." "No, stay." Lila's voice was sharp with panic. "I want witnesses. I want someone here who'll tell me the truth instead of dancing around it like it's going to break me." Sam stopped, looking to Eli for guidance. Eli nodded once, and Sam resumed his position by the window, his weathered face grave. "The truth," Lila said, her voice rising. "Right now, all of it." Mara took a shaky breath. "When you were 6 weeks old, there was a mix-up at the hospital. Your birth parents, your biological parents, were listed incorrectly on the paperwork. By the time the error was discovered, you'd already been placed with us for emergency adoption." "My birth parents," Lila repeated slowly. "What happened to them?" "Your mother died in a car accident," Eli said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your father tried to get you back, but the legal system, it was complicated. By the time everything was sorted out, the adoption had been finalized." Lila stared at him, pieces of an impossible puzzle starting to click into place. "How do you know that? How do you know any of that?" Eli's hands shook as he reached for the manila envelope on his workbench. "Because I was your father, am your father. Your name was Emma Carter." The words hit her like physical blows. Emma Carter, not Lila Bennett. The garage seemed to tilt around her, and she gripped the edge of the tool cart to keep from falling. "That's not," she started, then stopped. "That's impossible." "I have the papers," Eli said, holding out the envelope with hands that trembled. "Birth certificate, adoption records, everything." "Papers can be faked." "They're not faked," Mara said quietly. "I've had copies for 19 years. I always planned to show them to you when you were ready." "Ready for what? Ready to learn that my entire life has been a lie?" "Not a lie," Eli said urgently. "Different than what you thought, but not a lie. Mara and David raised you, loved you, gave you everything I couldn't." "Don't." Lila's voice cracked. "Don't you dare stand there and tell me this is somehow okay. Don't tell me that giving me away was some noble sacrifice. I didn't give you away. You were taken. And you stopped fighting for me." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. "You had years to find me, to keep looking, to—" "I never stopped looking," Eli said, his composure finally cracking. "Do you think there's been a single day in 20 years when I haven't wondered where you were, whether you were happy, whether you needed anything?" "Then why didn't you tell me?" Lila's tears came now, hot and angry. "When I walked into this garage, when I started coming here every day, when I told you about feeling like I didn't belong, why didn't you say something?" "Because I was afraid," Eli admitted. "Afraid I was wrong, afraid of what it would do to you if I was right, afraid of losing you again. So instead you let me make a fool of myself. Let me talk about my adoption like it was some mystery while you sat there knowing exactly what happened. I wanted to tell you." "When? When were you planning to tell me? After I graduated, got married, had kids?" Lila wiped her face with the back of her hand, leaving streaks of grease from the garage. "Or were you just going to let me keep coming here, playing house with my biological father, pretending we were just friends?" It wasn't pretending, Eli said desperately. What we have, the connection, that's real. What we have is built on lies. Lila turned to Mara, her expression a mixture of hurt and betrayal. And you've been lying to me my whole life. I was protecting you. From what? From knowing who I am? From understanding why I never felt like I belonged? Lila's voice rose to nearly a shout. I spent 19 years thinking something was wrong with me because I didn't fit into your perfect little family. Nothing's wrong with you, Mara said, tears streaming down her face. You're perfect exactly as you are. I'm a stranger, Lila shot back. I'm someone else's daughter, who you've been pretending to love for 20 years. I'm not pretending anything. I love you more than my own life. But I'm not your life, am I? I'm his. Lila pointed at Eli with a shaking finger. I'm the daughter he lost, and you're the woman who found her. And I'm just, what? The prize in some cosmic custody battle? That's not how it is, Eli said. Isn't it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like everyone in this room has known who I am except me. Everyone's been making decisions about my life except me. She grabbed her helmet from where she'd set it down, her movements sharp with fury and hurt. Well, congratulations. Now I know. Emma Carter died in a car accident 20 years ago, and Lila Bennett is just some ghost you've been chasing ever since. Lila, please, Mara started. Don't. Just don't. Lila headed toward the door, then stopped and turned back. How long have you known? She asked Eli. How long have you been sure? Eli met her eyes, and she saw the answer there before he spoke. Since the first day you walked in here. The sound she made was half laugh, half sob. Of course you did. She shook her head, her smile bitter. You know what the really funny part is? I was starting to think of you as family, starting to imagine what it would be like to have a father who actually understood me. I do understand you. No, you don't. Because if you did, you'd know that the one thing I've always wanted more than anything else is the truth. And you took that away from me. Both of you did. She turned and walked out of the garage, leaving behind the pastries and the coffee and the 3 adults who'd just blown her world apart. The sound of her scooter starting was sharp in the morning air, and then she was gone, leaving nothing but the echo of angry words and the weight of 20 years' worth of secrets finally exposed. In the silence that followed, Eli sank onto his workbench stool, his face buried in his hands. Mara stood frozen by the tool cart, and Sam remained at his post by the window, watching the empty road where Lila had disappeared. Well, Sam said finally, that could have gone better. The photographs were scattered across Dean Holloway's desk like playing cards in a high-stakes game, each image a moment stolen from the past month of careful observation. Lila arriving at the garage with coffee, Eli showing her how to rebuild a carburetor. The two of them laughing over some shared joke while Roscoe dozed in the afternoon sun, a catalog of connection that told a story neither subject knew they were part of. Quite touching, really, Holloway said, sliding the photos across the polished mahogany toward his visitor. Father and daughter, reunited by fate, or in this case, by a broken scooter and carefully orchestrated circumstances. Detective Ray Cousins studied the images with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent 20 years reading evidence. He was a compact man in his 50s, with silver hair and the kind of steady demeanor that made people trust him with their secrets. Today, those secrets included a manila folder thick with documents that shouldn't have been accessible to civilians. Where did you get the adoption records? Cousins asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer wouldn't satisfy him. Public records, detective. Amazing what becomes available when you file the right requests with the right clerks. Holloway's smile was sharp enough to cut glass, though I imagine you already knew that. These aren't public records, Dean. Medical files, sealed adoption documents. This is protected information. Information that's relevant to a property dispute. The garage owner's emotional state, his potential motivations for refusing reasonable offers. Holloway leaned back in his leather chair, fingers steepled. All perfectly legitimate business intelligence. Cousins set down the photographs with disgust. This is a man's life you're interfering with. A girl who doesn't know her own history. A girl who deserves to know her own history, and a man who's been living a lie for 20 years. Holloway stood, moving to the window that overlooked Harbor Street and Carter's garage in the distance. Tell me, detective, in your professional opinion, should Eli Carter be allowed to continue this charade? Let the girl keep visiting, keep forming emotional attachments, while he sits on information that could change her entire understanding of herself? That's not for you to decide. Isn't it, when I'm the one with the information, when I'm the one who has to act on it? Holloway turned back to face Cousins, his expression mock serious. You know as well as I do that secrets have a way of destroying people. Better to bring everything into the light. Your concern for their welfare is touching, Cousins said dryly. I'm sure it has nothing to do with wanting Carter's property. My motivations are irrelevant. The truth is the truth, regardless of who benefits from revealing it. Cousins gathered the photographs and documents, sliding them back into his briefcase. I won't be part of this, Dean. Whatever game you're playing, count me out. I'm not playing a game, I'm ending one. Holloway returned to his desk, pulling out a fresh folder. With or without your help, detective. Though I thought you might appreciate being involved in reuniting a father with his lost daughter. By ambushing them with private investigators and blackmail. By providing them with information they should have had years ago. Holloway's mask of civility slipped, revealing something harder underneath. Do you know what it's like to watch someone throw away opportunity after opportunity because they're too stubborn to see reason? Carter's garage sits on prime waterfront property, detective. Property that could generate jobs, revenue, growth for this entire community. But he'd rather sit there playing mechanic, living in the past, clinging to ghosts. So you decided to dig up his actual ghosts and use them against him. I decided to give him a reality check. His daughter, his real living, breathing daughter, has been coming to see him every day for a month. She's looking for connection, for family, for someone who understands her. And he's been lying to her face while she pours her heart out to him. Cousins stood, his expression grim. You're going to destroy both of them. I'm going to free both of them. From secrets, from lies, from the prison of their own making. Holloway moved to his office door, holding it open in clear dismissal. But if you're not interested in helping, I understand. Some people prefer their comfortable illusions to uncomfortable truths. After Cousins left, Holloway returned to his desk and picked up his phone, dialing a number he'd memorized weeks ago. Mrs. Bennett? Dean Holloway. I think it's time we had that conversation we discussed. An hour later, Ma Bennett sat in Holloway's office, her hands folded tightly in her lap as she stared at the photographs spread across his desk. Her face had gone pale when she saw them, and she hadn't spoken since he'd explained how long he'd been watching her daughter. How long have you known? She asked finally. Suspected? About 3 weeks. Confirmed? Since yesterday, when my investigator finished cross-referencing the hospital records. Holloway settled back in his chair, studying her reaction. The question is, Mrs. Bennett, how long have you known? That Eli Carter was her biological father? I didn't. The adoption agency never told us his name. Mara's voice was barely above a whisper. But when Lila started talking about spending time at a garage, about a mechanic who was kind to her, I started to wonder. But you didn't investigate. I didn't want to know. The admission came out like a confession. I was afraid if I knew for certain, I'd have to tell her. And telling her meant risking losing her. So you've been content to let her form an attachment to her biological father while keeping both of them in the dark? I've been trying to protect my daughter from information that could destroy her sense of security. Your daughter, Holloway repeated. Interesting choice of words, considering she's not actually yours. Mara's head snapped up, fire flashing in her eyes. She's been my daughter for 19 years, Mr. Holloway. Biology doesn't change that. Doesn't it? Because from these photographs it looks like she's found her real family. And they seem quite happy together. She doesn't know who he is. Which brings us to why you're here. Holloway leaned forward, his voice taking on the persuasive tone he used in business negotiations. This situation can't continue, Mrs. Bennett. Secrets this big have a way of coming out, usually at the worst possible moment. Better to control the revelation than let it control you. What are you suggesting? That we arrange a meeting, you, me, Mr. Carter, and his friend Sam O'Reilly, a chance to discuss the situation like adults before it spirals out of control. And if we refuse? Holloway's smile was thin. Then I'll have to consider other options. Anonymous tips to local journalists, perhaps. Social media can be so unpredictable these days. Mara closed her eyes, the weight of 20 years' worth of difficult decisions settling on her shoulders. "You're asking me to help you destroy my family. I'm asking you to help me reveal the truth. What happens after that is up to all of you." He stood, moving around the desk to tower over her. "But make no mistake, Mrs. Bennet, this story is coming out. The only question is whether you want to be part of telling it or part of what gets revealed." Later that evening, as Mara drove through the quiet streets of Millfield toward Carter's garage, she tried to prepare herself for the conversation that would change everything. In her rearview mirror, she could see Holloway's sedan following at a discreet distance, and she knew that whatever happened next, there would be no going back. The garage lights were on when she arrived, and through the windows she could see Eli working late, probably trying to distract himself from thoughts he couldn't escape. Sam's truck was parked nearby, suggesting that Eli had called in reinforcements for moral support. Mara sat in her car for a long moment, watching the two men inside the garage. Tomorrow, her daughter would learn that her entire life had been built on carefully maintained silence. Tomorrow, Eli Carter would discover whether hope could survive the weight of reality. And tomorrow, all three of them would have to figure out how to move forward with a truth that had the power to heal or destroy everything they'd built. She took a deep breath, gathered her courage, and stepped out into the cool Maine evening, walking toward a conversation that would end one story and begin another. The morning after the revelation, Eli sat in his empty garage nursing cold coffee and watching dust motes dance in the October sunlight. The space felt hollow without Lila's presence, without her sketchbook balanced on the familiar crate, or her voice asking questions about carburetors and timing belts. Even Roscoe seemed dejected, padding restlessly between the workbench and the door as if expecting her to materialize at any moment. 24 hours had passed since his world had exploded and reformed, since hope had transformed into devastation and back into something he couldn't quite name. He'd spent the sleepless night replaying every conversation with Lila, every moment when he could have told her the truth, every choice that had led them to yesterday's disaster. The sound of claws on concrete made him look up. Roscoe stood by the open bay door, tail wagging tentatively, looking toward the street with the expectant posture that usually announced Lila's arrival. But instead of her bright blue scooter, Eli saw his golden retriever trotting purposefully down Harbor Street, heading toward town with the determination of a dog on a mission. "Roscoe," Eli called, but the dog didn't even slow down. "Where the hell are you going?" 15 minutes later, Sam O'Reilly's truck pulled into the garage drive, and Eli could see Roscoe sitting shotgun with the satisfied expression of a dog who'd successfully summoned backup. "Your escape artist showed up at my house," Sam said, climbing out with a thermos of coffee and a paper bag that smelled like bacon. "Figured you might need company." "I need my dog back." "Roscoe's fine where he is. You, on the other hand, look like you've been hit by a bus." Sam settled onto the crate that had become Lila's unofficial seat, and Eli tried not to wince at the sight. "Eat something. Then we're going to figure out how to fix this." Nothing to fix. She knows the truth now. That's what everyone wanted. That's what Holloway wanted. What Lila wanted was honesty, not manipulation. Sam unwrapped a breakfast sandwich and handed it to Eli. "There's a difference." Eli stared at the food without appetite. "She hates me. She's hurt and confused and probably scared out of her mind." Sam poured coffee from his thermos, the steam rising between them like incense. "Give her time to process, then go talk to her." "And say what? Sorry I let you fall in love with the idea of having a father while I played detective with your DNA? Say that you were scared. Say that you didn't know how to tell her without destroying the relationship you'd built." Sam's voice gentled. "Say that you love her and you're sorry." Before Eli could respond, another vehicle pulled into the drive. This time it was Mara's Honda, with Lila's scooter balanced carefully in a trailer behind it. Mara emerged looking haggard, her usual composure replaced by the exhaustion of a woman who'd spent the night in difficult conversations. "She's not speaking to me," Mara said without preamble. "Hasn't said a word since yesterday, just sits in her room sketching and crying." "What's she drawing?" Eli asked, the question surprising all three of them. Mara's expression softened slightly. "You, the garage, Roscoe." Over and over, like she's trying to capture something she's afraid of losing. The words hit Eli harder than any accusation could have. "She brought her scooter? Asked me to return it. Said she wouldn't be needing repairs anymore." Mara's voice cracked. She's talking about transferring schools, moving away, starting over somewhere that doesn't have so many lies." "It wasn't all lies," Eli said quietly. "No, but the truth was buried so deep it might as well have been." Mara looked around the garage, taking in the organized chaos that had become her daughter's sanctuary. She loves this place, loves you, and now she can't separate the relationship from the deception. "So what do? We give her what she's always wanted," Sam said. "Complete honesty. No more secrets, no more protecting her from difficult truths. And if she decides she wants nothing to do with either of us, then we respect that choice," Mara said, though the words clearly cost her. "But we make sure she knows all her options first." They were interrupted by the sound of light footsteps on gravel. Through the window, Eli watched Lila approach slowly, as if drawn by invisible threads despite her anger. She looked smaller than usual, younger, wearing an oversized sweater and clutching her sketchbook like armor. She paused at the garage entrance, taking in the scene of three adults who'd clearly been discussing her. Her eyes were red-rimmed but determined, and when she spoke, her voice was steady. "I want to hear it from the beginning," she said. "All of it. No edited versions, no protective omissions. If you're going to ruin my life with the truth, at least have the decency to tell me the whole story." For the next 2 hours, they sat in the garage and laid bare 20 years of complicated history. Mara talked about the desperate young couple who'd been told their adopted daughter needed immediate placement. Eli spoke about the legal battles and the devastating decision to stop fighting. Sam filled in details about the aftermath, about watching his best friend learn to live with loss. Lila listened without interruption, her pencil moving across the sketchbook pages in careful strokes that seemed to help her process the overwhelming narrative. When they finished, silence settled over the garage like dust. "I need to know something," Lila said finally. "When I started coming here, when we became friends, was any of that real, or were you just trying to decide if I was worth claiming?" Eli met her eyes directly. "Every moment was real. Every conversation, every laugh, every time you made this place feel less empty, all of that was real. The only thing that wasn't real was my courage to tell you why it mattered so much." "And you?" she asked Mara. "Were you ever going to tell me?" "I don't know," Mara admitted. "I kept waiting for the right time, the right words. But mostly I was just afraid of losing you." Lila closed her sketchbook and stood, walking to the workbench where Eli kept his tools. She picked up a wrench, testing its weight in her palm. "I've been thinking," she said, "about families and truth and what it means to belong somewhere." She set the wrench down carefully. "I think the problem isn't that you lied to me, the problem is that you didn't trust me with the truth." "We were trying to protect you," Mara said. "I know, but protection without trust isn't love, it's control." Lila turned back to face them. "If we're going to do this, if we're going to try to be some kind of family, it has to be based on honesty. Complete honesty. No more decisions made for my own good without my input." "What are you saying?" Eli asked. "I'm saying I want to try, not because of biology or legal documents or guilt, but because when I'm here, when I'm with both of you, I feel like I'm home for the first time in my life." Her smile was tentative but genuine. "But it has to be my choice, and it has to be real." Roscoe chose that moment to escape from Sam's truck and bound into the garage, tail wagging with unbridled joy as he launched himself at Lila. She caught him in a hug that turned into laughter, and for a moment the heavy weight of complicated truths lifted. "So," she said, scratching behind Roscoe's ears, "I hear there's a motorcycle in the back that needs restoring. Think you could teach me how to rebuild an engine properly this time? No secrets, no holding back because you think I can't handle it?" Eli felt tears prick his eyes. "Yeah, I think I can do that." "Good. Because I have 20 years of lost time to make up for, and I plan to learn everything." She looked between Eli and Mara with the kind of determined expression that brooked no argument. "We all do." As the afternoon wore on, they worked together on the old Triumph motorcycle Eli had been saving for a special project. Lila's hands proved as capable as her mind, and watching her tackle the complexities of engine mechanics with the same intensity she brought to her art, Eli began to understand that some gifts were worth waiting 20 years to unwrap. Outside, the October sun painted Harbor Street in shades of gold and amber, and the sound of laughter echoed from Carter's garage for the first time in decades. It wasn't the family any of them had planned, but it was the family they'd chosen, built on truth and forgiveness and the radical act of starting over. Later, as Lila and Mara prepared to leave for dinner, the first meal they'd share as mother and daughter who finally knew where they stood, she turned back to Eli with a question that had been building all day. "What should I call you?" she asked. "I mean, Eli doesn't feel right anymore, but Dad feels big." Eli considered the question seriously. "How about we start with Eli and see where it goes? Sometimes the best relationships can't be rushed." "Sometimes," Lila agreed, pulling on her helmet. "But sometimes they're worth the wait." As her scooter puttered away down Harbor Street with Mara following close behind, Eli stood in his garage doorway with Roscoe at his side watching his daughter, his actual, living, breathing daughter, disappear around the bend. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conversations, new ways of learning to be a family. But tonight, for the first time in 20 years, the future felt full of possibility instead of ghosts. And in the distance, the sound of the ocean reminded him that some tides, no matter how long delayed, always find their way home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.